March 6, 1944, Rechlin Airfield, 80 miles north of Berlin. The silver fighter sits under harsh floodlights in Hangar 7, its aluminum skin still streaked with hydraulic fluid and carbon scoring. The American star on the fuselage is unmistakable. Around it, a half-dozen Luftwaffe engineers stand in silence, staring at what shouldn't exist, a long-range escort fighter that just flew deeper into Germany than any Allied plane has a right to. One man kneels beside the wing, running his hand along the pylon where an external fuel tank once hung. His fingers trace the mounting brackets, the fuel lines, the emergency release mechanism. Then he looks up at his colleagues, and the color drains from his face. Because the math they're about to do will prove something terrifying. American fighters aren't stretching to reach Berlin. They're arriving with fuel to spare. 4 days earlier, the morning sky over East Anglia rumbles with the sound of 1,000 radial engines. It's March 2, 1944, and the 8th Air Force is launching Operation Argument's final blow, a maximum effort strike against Berlin itself. Over 700 B-17s and B-24s form up in massive combat boxes, their contrails writing geometry across the winter sky. For the bomber crews, this is the mission they've dreaded since training. Big B, the Reich's capital. 1,100 miles round trip through the most heavily defended airspace on Earth. But today, something is different. Strapped into the cockpit of his P-51 Mustang, Lieutenant Robert Johnson of the 61st Fighter Squadron adjusts his oxygen mask and scans the horizon. His fighter group, the 56th, has been reassigned to fly top cover all the way to the target, not to the Belgian border, not to the Rhine, all the way to Berlin. 6 months ago, this would have been suicide. American fighters could barely reach the German frontier before turning back, leaving the bombers to face the Luftwaffe alone in an aerial killing field. Losses ran as high as 20% on some missions. Entire squadrons were obliterated in minutes. But the Mustang changed everything. With its Packard-built Merlin engine and sleek laminar flow wings, the P-51 could outrun, outclimb, and outmaneuver nearly every German fighter in production. More importantly, with 2 75-gallon drop tanks slung beneath its wings, it could fly farther than any single-engine fighter in the world. Today, 800 American fighters will escort the bombers to Berlin and back. The Luftwaffe has never faced anything like this before. As Johnson's Mustang climbs through 20,000 feet, he toggles his radio. Diamond leader to flight, stay tight, long way to go. He doesn't know it yet, but beneath him, German radar operators are watching the formations with growing disbelief. The American fighters aren't turning back. They're still coming, mile after impossible mile. And in Fighter Command headquarters outside Berlin, Adolf Galland, Germany's youngest general and the Luftwaffe's most experienced fighter tactician, is receiving reports that will force him to confront an unbearable truth. The war in the air is already over. Germany just doesn't know it yet. The dogfight happens in vertical slashes of tracer fire and burning metal at 25,000 feet. Johnson spots them first, a swarm of 4 FW-190s diving out of the sun, their radial engines howling as they plunge toward a straggling B-17. He banks hard left, feeling the Mustang respond like an extension of his own body, and triggers his gun sight. The lead Focke-Wulf breaks right, but Johnson stays with him, pulling 6 GS in a tightening spiral. For 90 seconds they dance through the frozen sky. Then Johnson's .50 calibers find their mark. The 190 shudders, trailing smoke, and peels away into a steep dive. Johnson doesn't follow, rookie mistake. Never chase a damaged enemy down, not this deep in enemy territory. But as he climbs back to rejoin his flight, he glances at his fuel gauge. He's been over Germany for 45 minutes. He's just fought a turning engagement at combat power, and he still has enough fuel to escort the bombers home. That same afternoon, 150 miles east, a Mustang from the 354th Fighter Group takes flak damage over the target and loses altitude rapidly. The pilot, Lieutenant Charles Gum, wrestles with the controls as his engine sputters and hydraulic fluid streams from ruptured lines. At 8,000 feet, he makes the hardest decision a fighter pilot can make. He points the nose down and looks for somewhere flat. He belly lands in a field near Storkow, 30 miles southeast of Berlin. The Mustang cartwheels twice, shedding parts, before sliding to a stop in a spray of frozen earth. Gum crawls from the wreckage, dazed but alive, and within minutes, Wehrmacht soldiers arrive to take him prisoner. But they're not the only ones interested in the crashed fighter. Within hours, Luftwaffe technical intelligence receives word of the intact P-51 capture. By nightfall, a recovery team is loading the battered aircraft onto a flatbed truck. By dawn, it's on a train heading north to Rechlin, the Luftwaffe's equivalent of America's Wright Field, where captured Allied aircraft are analyzed, tested, and their secrets extracted. What the Germans don't yet understand is that this particular Mustang still has its combat mission fuel charts in the cockpit map case. Charts that show not just the route to Berlin, but the fuel reserves calculated for the return journey. Charts that prove American fighters can reach anywhere in Germany and still fight their way home. At Rechlin, Oberingenieur Hermann Wurster, chief of enemy aircraft evaluation, personally supervises the Mustang's arrival. He's examined dozens of Allied planes, Spitfires, Thunderbolts, even a captured B-17. But as his team begins their inspection, pulling cowling panels and checking fuel systems, Wurster senses this examination will be different. Because this plane shouldn't be here, not with fuel to spare. The inspection begins at first light. Wurster and his team work methodically, documenting every detail of the captured P-51. They measure the wing, square feet, remarkably small for a fighter with this range. They calculate the fuel capacity, internal tanks holding 184 gallons, plus the empty drop tank pylons that once carried 150 additional gallons. They weigh components, test the Packard Merlin V1650 engine on a dynamometer, and map the aerodynamic efficiency of that revolutionary laminar flow wing. But it's the operational documents that tell the real story. In the map case behind the pilot's seat, they find the mission planning cards. Typed neatly in English, the cards lay out the fuel calculations for the Berlin escort mission with brutal precision. Takeoff to target, 460 nautical miles. Estimated consumption, 220 gallons. Combat reserve over target area, 45 minutes at combat power. Return to base, 460 nautical miles. Estimated consumption, 180 gallons. Emergency reserve, 25 gallons. Wurster stares at the numbers. He runs them again, then a third time. The mathematics are undeniable. The Americans aren't flying at the edge of their range. They're arriving over Berlin with enough fuel for sustained combat, enough to chase, engage, and fight at full throttle for nearly an hour, and still return to England with reserve fuel for weather diversions or emergencies. For a German engineer who has spent 3 years watching the Luftwaffe bleed itself white defending the Reich, these numbers are a death sentence written in fuel consumption rates and nautical miles. He picks up the phone and calls Luftwaffe High Command. "Get me General Galland, immediately." 60 miles south, in his headquarters at Tempelhof, Adolf Galland is already reviewing after-action reports from March 6th with mounting frustration. The American raid on Berlin involved over 800 fighters. His pilots reported engaging enemy escorts as far east as Brandenburg. Multiple Jagdgeschwader, fighter wings, scrambled to intercept, and while they shot down 69 American bombers, they lost 66 fighters in exchange. But it's not the loss ratio that troubles Galland. He's seen worse. What troubles him is the operational reality those numbers represent. For 3 years, Germany's defense has relied on a simple equation. American bombers must fly unescorted deep into Germany, where superior German fighters can attack them with impunity. The Luftwaffe could concentrate overwhelming force at a single point, shred a bomber formation, and land to rearm before the next wave arrived. But if American fighters can escort all the way to any target in Germany, that equation collapses. The Luftwaffe must now fight the American fighter force, which outnumbers them 3-1, before engaging the bombers. And in a war of attrition against American industrial capacity, Germany cannot win. Galland has known this intellectually for months, but when the call from Rechlin comes through and Wurster walks him through the captured Mustang's fuel calculations, something changes. The theoretical becomes concrete. The possible becomes inevitable. "How many of these aircraft do the Americans have?" Galland asks. "Intelligence estimates 400 operational P-51s with the 8th Air Force as of this week," Wurster replies. "Production is approximately 500 aircraft per month. By summer, they'll have over 1,000. Galland is silent for a long moment. Then he says quietly, "Write your report. I'll brief Göring tomorrow." He knows what this means. It means the carefully constructed defensive system, the radar networks, the fighter formations, the veteran pilots, the tactical innovations, all of it is now obsolete. Not because German fighters aren't good enough. The FW-190 and Bf-109 are still formidable machines. Not because German pilots aren't skilled enough. Many are aces with dozens of kills. But because Germany cannot build fighters fast enough, train pilots fast enough, or produce fuel fast enough to compete with an enemy who can now bring overwhelming force to any point in the Reich's airspace. The war isn't over, but the arithmetic says it's unwinnable. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring doesn't want to hear it. It's March 10, 1944, and Galland stands in Göring's ornate office at Karrenhall, the Reichsmarschall's estate north of Berlin. On the desk between them lies Worster's technical report, 30 pages of engineering analysis that conclude what Galland has come to say. Germany's air defenses are now strategically ineffective. Göring, dressed in one of his elaborate custom uniforms, waves dismissively at the document. One captured aircraft proves nothing. The Americans got lucky. They won't sustain these operations. They already are, Galland responds, keeping his voice level. March 6 was not an anomaly. They hit Berlin again on the 8th with full fighter escort. On the 9th, they escorted bombers to München. Today, they're over Brunswick. Each time, the P-51s are present in greater numbers. Each time, our pilots report the same thing. American fighters with fuel to spare, engaging aggressively deep into the Reich. Galland opens his briefcase and places 3 documents on the desk. These are loss reports from the last 10 days. We've lost 355 fighters. Pilots killed, 187. Wounded, 103. Many were our most experienced flight leaders, men with years of combat experience, irreplaceable tactical knowledge. He pauses, letting the numbers settle. We shot down 294 American aircraft in the same period, but American production replaces their losses in 3 days. Our production takes 3 weeks, and we're running out of experienced pilots faster than we can train new ones. Göring's face reddens. Then we build more fighters, we train more pilots, With what fuel? Galland interrupts, his patience breaking. With what instructors? With what time? Herr Reichsmarschall, we are not losing because of courage or tactics. We are losing because the Americans have solved the fundamental problem of strategic air warfare. They can now protect their bombers anywhere their bombers can fly, and we cannot stop both simultaneously. For a long moment, Göring is silent. Then he says quietly, "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we face reality. The daytime air battle over Germany is lost. We should preserve our fighter force, withdraw from attrition battles, and concentrate on night operations and point defense of critical industries. We should." Defeatism, Göring slams his hand on the desk. "I will not listen to defeatism." But even as he says it, both men know the truth. The captured Mustang sitting in Rechlin is more than a technical curiosity. It's physical proof that the strategic balance has shifted irreversibly. Germany can still inflict losses. German pilots will still fight with skill and courage, but they're now fighting a war that arithmetic has already decided. Galland leaves Karrenhall without authorization for any change in tactics. Göring, living in his fantasy world of medals and uniforms, refuses to accept that his Luftwaffe, once the terror of Europe, is being systematically dismantled by American industrial capacity and a single revolutionary fighter design. But in the weeks that follow, the evidence becomes impossible to ignore. April 1944, American fighters escort bombers to Bucharest, Romania, 700 miles round trip. May 1944, P-51s provide cover for the first shuttle bombing raids, landing in the Soviet Union after escorting bombers across all of Germany. June 1944, over 1,000 P-51 Mustangs are operational with the 8th and 15th Air Forces. The Luftwaffe's loss rate accelerates. By D-Day, German fighter strength in the West has been cut in half. Experienced pilots are dying faster than replacements can be trained. Fuel shortages ground entire Geschwader for days at a time. And at Rechlin, the captured Mustang remains in its hangar, occasionally flown by test pilots who file reports praising its performance. But these reports are now academic. The strategic question has been answered. The Mustang doesn't just work, it works too well for Germany to counter. In that hangar, under harsh fluorescent lights, sits the physical embodiment of why Germany will lose the air war. Not through some dramatic turning point or climactic battle, but through relentless, arithmetical inevitability. By August 1944, the transformation is complete. American fighters don't just escort bombers, they hunt. P-51s roam across Germany at low altitude, strafing airfields, trains, and anything that moves. They engage German fighters on takeoff and landing, when they're most vulnerable. They establish air superiority so complete that Luftwaffe pilots call American fighters Indian territory. Fly there and you won't come back. The statistics tell the story with brutal clarity. In January 1944, before the Mustang arrived in force, the 8th Air Force lost 268 bombers. By August 1944, with full P-51 escort coverage, losses dropped to 40 bombers per month despite flying deeper into Germany and hitting more heavily defended targets. German fighter losses accelerate catastrophically. In the 6 months following the capture of that P-51 at Storkow, the Luftwaffe loses over 2,200 fighters and 1,400 pilots in the West. Many are irreplaceable veterans, men with years of combat experience. Their replacements arrive at frontline units with barely 100 hours of total flight time. Inadequate training that makes them easy prey for experienced American pilots, who now fly the most capable fighter in the sky. At Rechlin, the captured Mustang eventually becomes part of a flying collection of Allied aircraft used for training, recognition, and tactics. But by late 1944, there's little point. German pilots know the P-51 intimately. It's the silver fighter that appears without warning and dominates every engagement. Adolf Galland, frustrated by Göring's refusal to adapt strategy, eventually requests a return to combat flying. In November 1944, he leads an elite unit of FW-190s and Bf-109s in one last desperate attempt to prove that German fighters can still compete. They shoot down 50 American bombers in a single mission. It changes nothing. The losses are replaced within days. Galland is shot down twice, survives both times, and ends the war having seen his worst predictions come true. In post-war interviews, he repeatedly cites the Mustang as the weapon that broke the Luftwaffe's back. When we saw the P-51s over Berlin, he said, we knew the war was lost. Hermann Wurster, the engineer who first examined the captured Mustang, survives the war and later works on civilian aircraft design. In the 1970s, he's interviewed by aviation historians and recalls the moment he opened the map case and found the fuel planning cards. I knew immediately what it meant, he said. It meant we were facing an enemy who had solved problems we didn't even know existed. The American industrial system, their approach to aircraft design, their operational planning, it was all years ahead of us. That single aircraft told me everything I needed to know about how the war would end. The captured Mustang itself disappears during the collapse of the Reich in 1945, likely destroyed by retreating German forces or captured by advancing Soviets. Its serial number, 43-6819, appears in post-war records as lost in German territory, fate unknown. But its impact echoes through history. The P-51 Mustang goes on to escort bombers on every major raid until Germany surrenders. It establishes a kill ratio of nearly 11-to-1 against German fighters. It proves that long-range escort is not just possible but dominant. And it becomes the template for every air superiority fighter designed afterward, proving that strategic range, tactical performance, and operational flexibility can exist in a single airframe. Today, if you visit the Air Force Museum at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, you can see P-51 Mustangs restored to pristine condition, their aluminum skin gleaming under museum lights. Stand close, and you can still see the mounting brackets for drop tanks under the wings, the simple hardware modification that changed the course of the air war. And if you know the story, you can imagine a cold March morning in 1944 in a hangar north of Berlin, where a German engineer ran calculations on captured fuel charts and understood, with perfect clarity, that his country's skis were no longer defensible. Not by tactics, not by courage, not by skill, but by arithmetic alone.